welcome to the Why on Earth Communities Stewardship and Sustainability podcast series. Today, we have the opportunity to visit with Ludovica Martella. Hi, Ludovica.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Great. It's so great to have this opportunity to visit with you. And here we are in the new school in New York City. We'll talk about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And before we dive in, just let me introduce you to our audience. So Ludovica Martella is a researcher currently enrolled in a post-master's degree in sustainability strategy at the New School in New York City, where she is focusing on Indigenous ecology and environmental justice. Ludovica also holds a Master's of Arts in International Relations from the Milano School of Policy, Management and Environment at the New School, and a Bachelor's in Journalism from Fordham University. Ludovica's work focuses on the repercussion of climate change on minority groups, such as women and Indigenous people. In the past, she has worked with United Nations Women and the UN Development Program in promoting and implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, on these very topics. Currently, she is an adult mentor for the youth climate organization This Is 0 Hour, one of the leading organizers of the global climate strike, which happened on September 20th of 2019, just earlier this year. So Ludovica, it is such a joy to have this opportunity to visit with you.
Same for
and looking forward to sharing your work and your vision, your mission, your knowledge with our audience. And I thought, maybe just by way of jumping in, I might ask you, here we are in the new school. Tell us just a bit about this place. What's going on here? Why are you here?
Sure. Glad to be here. The new school is actually a very special place because it was founded on principles of equality between people, between ideas. So the new school is actually celebrating its 100 years of new. And this is because here we really want to focus on new ideas. So what it means is that all of our professors are focused on the idea that we don't have to follow the traditional teachings of the colonizer world, as we call it.
Mm-hmm.
But there is more. So that's why I'm here. I'm studying Indigenous ecologies, something that unfortunately I found while I was browsing through programs. I found it to be very rare to find a university with such a rich program in Indigenous cultures, Indigenous rights and history. And therefore this is why I'm here.
Absolutely beautiful. And given that it's the 100-year anniversary, it tells us that the new school was founded right around the time of World War I, right? And there's a really special history there that I think it'd be great to share with folks.
Absolutely. Yes, the new school was founded because groups of intellectuals that were fleeing Europe needed a place where they could actually aggregate and teach and write. So therefore, they formed the new school, and they called it the new school because of that, because they wanted to really create a group of people that was against all of the persecution that was happening in Europe at that time. And still today we get very radical ideas here that you probably wouldn't get in more traditional universities. And I'm including, also universities from my home country of Italy, which is obviously very traditional. And yes.
Well, I love it. And I love the word radical, right? Because it actually comes from Latin rax radix, meaning roots. And there's some very important connection there, right?
Absolutely. Yes, that's a great point.
That's wonderful. Well, so let's start diving into this work you're doing around the Sustainable Development Goals, how it's affecting different peoples. And perhaps you could kind of kick it off by explaining what are the Sustainable Development Goals and why are they important?
Sure. So the Sustainable Development Goals are a set of 17 goals that were established in 2015 by the United Nations, and they symbolize different causes, but they all actually connect around climate action, and this is something that sometimes people miss because the Sustainable Development Goals, also called SDGs, or perhaps people might have heard of them with the term Agenda 2030. They are really all different but connected. So, for example, there's no poverty, zero hunger, good mental health, good physical health, gender equality, peace and security, and so on. So they might seem all different, but they're all very much connected. And this is something that, yes, sometimes people don't really think about because it's obvious people might have a preference, a personal preference, because of their personal history towards one cause more than another one. Mm-hmm. But it's important to recognize the connection between them.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems that there's so much important work being done by so many organizations and leaders, particularly around how climate crisis and other environmental crises are impacting peoples all over the world, and most particularly peoples of color, peoples from the global south, indigenous peoples, and women, right? And this is obviously a big part of your work.
Absolutely. Yes, so this is something that I love to talk about because throughout my research, I realized really how all of these goals interact between each other, which is something that, to be fairly honest, I didn't quite grasp from my textbooks or from even some of the work that I share with colleagues. Because I worked at several UN agencies, and each agency really focuses usually on one or two goals. But by mixing my experience at work with also my studies, I really had this haha moment, let's say. So, and we can think about this, for example. So the most recent report from the IPCC, which is in the International Panel on Climate Change,
right? Yep.
Really shows some drastic estimates of climate change, which only confirms what scientists have been saying for years. All of these climatic causes, so for example, already the factor that we are at 1.1 Celsius degrees warmer in the atmosphere than the pre-industrial levels, so I'm referring to the Industrial Revolution, is causing drastic climatic effects. Droughts, wildfires, we've seen them in the news in the most recent years. So what happens? All of these effects on the earth disrupt our agricultural system. And sometimes people don't realize that the majority of people who work in the agricultural sector are women, especially in developing countries. So if our climate is affected by these tremendous climatic disruptions, then it's impossible to achieve the first goal of the Sustainable Development Goal, no poverty, because people will need to relocate because they are suffering from droughts and their crops are not producing anymore what they were the food that they were producing before, and this also makes it impossible to really achieve even the second goal which is zero hunger.
Yeah.
Already the people who are working on crops are the ones who are the most malnourished in the world. And the Food and Agricultural Organization in 2017 released a report that estimated that 80% of the people in developing countries are the ones who are producing the food for the developed countries. So they are already starting at a really impoverished point here, and climate change is making it even worse. And so we see how all of these connections between issues. So obviously, as I said, women are the ones who work the most on crops, and when they're forced to relocate, they usually leave behind their husbands, who usually are the ones who have jobs in the cities. And this is because in developing countries, there are less infrastructures and transportations for women to go from their homes to cities, so it's safer for the men to go and work in cities. So now we have already like disrupted families, now even more because of climate change, women traveling to other countries, risking their safety, their mental health, their physical health. And therefore we see how all of these goals are really screaming for climate action. So I think it's important to underline this, because sometimes people think that climate change is only, you know, a disruption of the weather, and we're getting heat waves, or it's the issues go much deeper than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that, for example, so many millions of people, refugees from Syria, and that we're living in a time right now where we have more refugees around the world than we've had since the Second World War. And Syria is experiencing a prolonged drought, right? And so there are underlying, often in the news, this appears as some sort of a political problem, and certainly the politics and the regimes play into it. But underlying that are these environmental massive dislocations, right, affecting all kinds of people, and especially women and also children, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Women and children and young girls are always the ones who are most affected, unfortunately. And it's interesting because now that you brought up this point of migration also in Syria, this is something that is really not talked about much when we think about the migration crisis. So whenever the news covers generally the migration crisis is just focused on migration and migration policy, but migration policy can come without appropriate climate action and climate change policy.
Right.
And it's really important to connect all of the dots, because you might find some people who might feel more propelled to perhaps like diminish their footprint if their cause at heart is to, for example, protect children worldwide, but might not perhaps like feel much affiliated with the climate change crisis, if that makes sense. And all of these problems worldwide are truly connected.
Yeah. I'm wondering, because I know in your research you're coming across a lot of specific examples of what you're talking about. And I'm wondering, I don't want to get too dramatic about it in our discussion here, but I think it's really important for people to understand what this means at the individual level, the family level, specifics. Are there any examples that come to mind for you?
Yes, definitely. When we talk about these issues, it's always a bit, let's say that the spirit of the conversation is never too happy, but I don't want to get too dramatic, but unfortunately these are very serious topics. Recently, well, about a year ago, in 2018, I worked alongside UN Women and the Sierra Club, the environmental NGO here in the US. We worked on a report that actually focused on women and migration due to the climate crisis. And this one is called Women on the Move, and it's free on the Sierra Club website. If it's really also short and concise if people are interested in looking that one up. And there are some interesting stories from women who were interviewed actually on the ground about their own experience, and most of them, well, the ones who really like found the strength to even talk about these issues seemed truly emotional about the fact that they were finally given light to and a spotlight to really talk about what was happening to them, because these are issues that truly cause a problem to mental health of people, and mental health is a huge taboo in our society, and it's not really like spoken about much. And we were briefly talking, me and you, about this before, when we were mentioning how, you know, if we're not happy, that really like impacts everything in our lives. It impacts our work and vice versa, our relationship to people around us, the energy that we put out there. So yes, there are several stories in the report, and I can go deep into one if you'd like, or we can leave it open for the audience to read.
I'll say it's your call. Do you feel like that is something we should share?
Well, yes. I guess I just really want people to like read the stories because they have direct quotes from the women interviewed, and it's really touching. So I probably won't give it justice myself, but we're talking about women who alone like traveled miles and miles by feet, carrying their children, carrying all of their belongings, just to move to another crop in places where they weren't even welcomed at first, because we're talking about impoverished places also. So people, when they're suffering, they might tend to, you know, not exactly being at their best. So some of them experience sexual violence. Almost all of them actually were approached by people who wanted to actually like sell them on the black market, but they were able to fortunately escape that kind of situation, and that only was possible through the collaboration between groups of women that traveled together. And I think this touches on another really important point, which is the collaboration between each other within this community. Whenever we collaborate one with another and we don't see each other as strictly individuals in our own world and with our individual agenda, we really can achieve greater things that are not possible on our own.
Which, on a very positive side of that coin, is the 17th, the final of the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Partnerships and collaboration.
Absolutely.
That shows that this issue where we have such incredibly vulnerable people, women, children, and that there are people, men probably almost entirely exploiting that situation for human trafficking. And the situation, the last statistic I've heard is that there are at least 30 million slaves and trafficked people worldwide right now. Some of them are in forced labor in agricultural and fishing situations. And of course, there's a worldwide human trafficking network that is often dealing with sex slavery. And so we have these extremely vulnerable populations being targeted, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and this is actually a topic that unfortunately is often even covered up by some governments, and it's some kind of information that people are reluctant to even give the people involved who are doing the research, who are involved in the legal system within countries. They are afraid to speak up, and I wish I could go deeper on that, because I did have conversations in my own country, especially with people who are involved in, within this system. Obviously not the traffickers, but the people who are trying to tackle this issue. But they're even afraid of speaking to the news about it, because unfortunately it's complex because of politics, and people are afraid. And I'm always a person who advocates for speaking up, obviously with the right precautions, always. But it's definitely tricky to address these issues, and I'm hoping for better institutions that can provide solutions and protection to these individuals.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so important for our audience to be able to connect the dots. Many of us are committed and concerned about environmental issues and social justice issues. And I think what we're talking about is one of the most critical nexus points that is happening right now around the world. And I think it's just really important that our audience understands that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, the climate crisis is causing all of these issues, and which people might not really think, as I was saying before, that they're caused by the climate. And it was remarkable last July of 2019 when I was volunteering and helping the organization, the youth climate organization. This is 0 Hour. They had a summit in Miami as a symbol of calling action to Miami, because it's estimated to go underwater, actually. We're having a summit there, and throughout the summit there were different workshops with different topics around climate, and one of these was women and climate. And the people organizing were asking, okay, so we want you to separate in different groups. What are the connections that you see between women's rights and climate change? And well, I started from an advantage point because I had already worked on these very issues with UN Women, and throughout my studies I had discovered the dots. But the people who were there, who were from diverse backgrounds and were there to learn, didn't know really the connection, so that they were there brainstorming, and that was fascinating to see, because it really shows how much information we are lacking from either the media or even like our educational system, to be fair, on these very issues. And it's important when we realize, just as people, how when we are stronger, when we're together we're stronger, how all of these issues together are actually what is causing all of the crisis in this world. And so if we can see everything together, that helps also to truly work on the individual issues, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It makes so much sense. You know, it's as if so much of the mainstream media is all about a currency of distraction, regardless of what channel you think you like or whatever. and that too often education is distractucation or something like that. And I am a huge fan of the work that teachers are tirelessly doing in communities all over, and often the curriculum selection is actually out of the hands of the teachers, because this is policy set at the state level. And even a couple states here in the United States, for example, are basically driving the national curriculum in a big way. And so a big responsibility we have at the individual level, the family level, the community level, is helping to make up for that, and to share different information, and to share different education. And I love, sorry, I'm a word nerd, but I love the word educate, because it means to lead out. And we're each educators in all of this work, and have the opportunity to do that with and for each other.
Absolutely.
Which is another element of this strengthening network of collaboration and partnership.
Absolutely. And don't apologize for being a
word nerd. Okay.
I think that's fascinating, absolutely, and that's most definitely interesting to everyone, to our audience, to me. That's great.
Well, I only apologize smiling, and I will also admit that in the book, And Why on Earth, we talk about seeing through the veil of the popular media-driven culture, and getting to the real story, getting to the real reality of what's happening culturally, what's happening environmentally, what's happening socially, what's happening spiritually. And I think in a way it's a good seg into another element of the work you're doing, to talk about the types of knowledge and wisdom and understanding of reality that is carried in indigenous cultures in particular. And I know that you're doing a lot of work around how indigenous wisdom is intimately connected with the environmental, ecological healing and stewardship that is absolutely critical and necessary right now.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering if you might speak to that a bit and share about that with us.
Of course. So first of all, I want to introduce this topic by saying that indigenous people are the one who should speak and be given the voice to do this.
Yeah.
And so I'm just here really admiring their way of life, and I'm here alongside with them, like fighting with them and for them. So I want to speak to this issue by recognizing my privilege and of being here and studying in New York and doing all of these things, and recognizing that they must be given the voice to really speak about what is happening in their communities and about their way of life.
This is like a perfect ad for some of our upcoming episodes, so stay tuned on that note.
Yes. So yes, I'm fascinated by the indigenous way of life, because indigenous people are truly connected to Mother Earth and to everything that we just spoken about, really about our connections and partnerships as people. It's really related to the climate issue, because all of the climate disruption really started before the Industrial Revolution, as our Western texts tell us. It really started with colonization.
Yeah.
Indigenous people are truly related to their earth and their cycles and their system. They live in what they call a cosmology of connection, where they see what the earth gives them and they give back to the earth. They don't just take. It's not a culture of extraction and consumerism. They give back to the earth in every way possible they can. And this is how the earth works. It's a cycle.
Yeah.
And all of the effects that are happening now with droughts and etc. are all a sign of what we have been doing wrong since colonization. So I'm studying indigenous ecologies, and I'm advocating for my indigenous sisters and brothers, because first of all, they've been completely violated of their human rights. and to practice, which entails practicing all of these rituals, but also practices of agriculture, for example, that respect the earth and don't disrupt the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, when the colonizers settled into the tribes, they took away all of their system. They, you know, took away their language, their traditions, everything that was maintaining life in these communities. And at this point, some scholars are trying to bring back this knowledge in order not only to rebalance the earth, so to tackle climate change, but also to truly teach people about the traditional way of life, which is not what we're living today. Yeah. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, there are some studies right now being done on agriculture, for example, which is being slowly reintegrated. But there are more and more traditional knowledge, especially on agriculture, that can truly benefit not only the indigenous people, but all of us. Because I've heard this claim, but what about us? Okay, we should give the land back to the indigenous people. What about us? So we're all connected. So there's not a distinction between us and them. If a population is suffering, we're suffering too in a way or another. Yeah. So I want to truly invite people to reflect on this idea of giving back to the earth when taking something, and this can be done through, for example, through composting. Yes. Which is probably one of the which is probably one of the ways that we've been seeing this idea portrayed in the Western society. Unfortunately, it's not as popular yet, but I guess we're getting there. But this really connects also with our ability to connect to Earth, also through appreciating the sun that we see every day, or that we might not see, and the elements, the air and the water, because we might undermine their importance, especially in a Western society, but all of these elements give life to our food, to us, because we couldn't live without either of the elements. So indigenous people truly have the knowledge and take care of this knowledge. So that, this is something that belongs to history, but it's reality.
Yes.
I see you want to add something.
Oh, you can. I'm so excited on this point. We were just a couple of days ago in upstate New York visiting with Mohawk leaders, elders, grandmothers, who are forming a project called the Three Sisters Sovereignty Project, where the Mohawk people, and I'm part Mohawk, so I'm 12.5% Mohawk, and I was actually joking with Chief Roger Jock about, I don't know which 12.5%, and he's like, you're mine in your heart, and I was like, yeah, perfect. And we did a ceremony up there, and he sang to the water, and he sang in gratitude for all the things, and this is part of the morning waking up way of life. And what's so amazing about these times, in my opinion, is that our science is actually becoming rather sophisticated now, and is starting to catch up and to understand that indeed those gestures are actually affecting the material physical world, and more importantly the biospheric, the living cycles and energy flows in this world. And we'll have a long discussion. We have time for friends to catch up on that. There's so much research coming out right now. Don't get stressed if that sounds stressful to you. But one of the ceremonies that Roger and our friend Tiffany Hope shared with us is called the scattering of the ashes. And so traditionally one would keep the fire all through the year, burning medicines, special herbs and plants with special properties. And at the end of the cycle, around the time of winter solstice or a little past, in the depths of winter, the ceremony is to take these ashes around to the whole village, have everyone stir and connect, and then they get scattered back into the landscape.
Wow.
Well, this is also distributing micronutrients.
Absolutely.
This is doing so much. So it's sometimes perhaps the way we were taught in grade school or whatever, these are kind of like neat, fanciful stories, and we dress up and do weird plays that are now considered objectionable. What most of us probably don't really understand is that many of these indigenous cultures and lifeways are maintaining knowledge about maintenance of ecosystems, i.e., this is how this spaceship works, right? The spaceship, we're all in space together, we're on a spaceship together, and these life support systems on some level require of us that reciprocity that you're speaking to, that relationship of when we take, we give back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned the water element, right? Because water is life, and this is one of the slogans of indigenous people, actually. And it's a really important topic, especially when we're talking about these major pipelines that corporations want to build, which then spill in the waterways of indigenous people, most likely, because all of these pipelines are mostly built away from big cities, right? And this also touches upon the huge element of environmental injustice, which happens even around the corner. In cities like New York, for example, all over the world, where harmful waste is usually dumped in poor neighborhoods, in neighborhoods most likely of people of color. So I see how these issues that relate to indigenous people definitely relate also to what are considered minorities in big cities and in developed countries. So the issue of water is truly important, because I feel that especially in the developed countries where water is abundant, or at least seems abundant, it's truly undermined. People use it, leave the sink open, don't think about it, don't celebrate it, just like indigenous people do, because we take it for granted. But unfortunately, water is becoming scarce, and it's the lifeblood of Earth, and we desperately need to work on our water usage and water celebration, because it gives life. Without water, we wouldn't be here. Our body is mostly water, so.
Yes, so beautiful, absolutely. Well, let me pause there, and I'm very excited to ask you a particular question.
Great.
On that note. But let me remind our audience that this is the Why on Earth Community's Stewardship and Sustainability podcast series, and we are visiting today with Ludovica Martella at the New School in New York City. To get more information about Ludovica's work, you can go to her blog, which is letstalkaboutit.space. We'll have all the spellings in the show notes. You can also find her on Instagram at lmartella, on Twitter at l_Martella, and on LinkedIn at Ludovica Martella. Also, we're going to talk about B corporations a little bit, which you can find information at bcorporation.net. And there's a great resource here on agroforestry, which we'll be getting to at the fao.org site /forestry/agroforestry/en. Want to take the opportunity to thank all of the sponsors who make this podcast possible. And that includes our corporate sponsors and allies, Association of Waldorf Schools of North America, Earth Coast Productions, Equal Exchange, the International Society of Sustainability Professionals, the Lidge Family Foundation, Madeira Outdoor, Patagonia, and Wele Waters. And I want to give a special shout out to all of the individuals in the Y on Earth community who have joined our monthly giving program to support all of this work with the podcast, our media resources, as well as all of our community mobilization actions around the country and increasingly through our ambassador network internationally. Now, if you haven't yet joined the monthly giving program, you can do so at any level that works best for you just by going to yonearth.org/support, or just click on the donate button on the homepage. And when you join the monthly giving program, I will send you a code for unlimited free downloads of all of our ebook and audio products, audiobook products, so that you can share with friends, with families, with colleagues at work, neighbors, anyone in your network you think will benefit from all of those resources. So that'll be yours when you join the monthly giving program. Again, a huge thanks for everybody supporting this work and helping us communicate and spread the ideas, the knowledge, the wisdom, the way that we are here today. And on that note, I want to ask, it's clear you're carrying a lot of knowledge and wisdom. And I also note that you are a native Italian speaker. And one of the things we talk about, I actually talked about it in the book, in Why on Earth, is that we're all indigenous to some place on the planet and to some culture connected to some place on the planet. And it's only a matter of how far back in time and how much recovery work is perhaps at hand in order to reestablish, reconnect, reinvigorate that reality. And I'm just curious for you, how does your ethnic and linguistic heritage inform this work, and what's that sense of connection you have specifically, maybe even with water, to that part of the world?
That is a very interesting question, and it's a tough one to answer because I'm actually in the middle of doing research on my heritage.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, with the elements that I have, through like family stories and things of this sort, I haven't been able to go back that much into my family history. Obviously people recognize Italy as being like in Europe, so obviously it doesn't very much like connect with like what indigenous history is, and this honestly like adds up like a very heavy emotional toll on me when I'm doing this work and researching, because I feel so deeply and sincerely connected with the indigenous cosmology and way of being. And I always thought, because of where I come from, that I was, like crazy, or like I believed in magic, and I always felt a bit like outside of the norm, or what is considered the norm. But since I started, especially with my connection to water, like since I was little, I always felt like truly connected to water. And since I started studying and researching, and especially talking to wonderful young leaders, indigenous leaders that I met at the 0 Hour Summit in Miami this past summer, I truly understood like why I feel so connected, especially as a woman, to water and to this kind of work. And now I feel like I have a place. It's sort of like feeling like I have a family, even though most people wouldn't recognize me as like being an Indigenous person. This is a very controversial topic because I spoke to some Indigenous people who told me, yes, everyone is Indigenous, everyone was Indigenous at some point, and others who told me, oh, I actually like don't believe that, like not everyone is Indigenous. So that is something I'm still working through, so like going deep into my heritage, but yes, I just wanted to really point out that after I spoke to Indigenous leaders and they told me exactly like what we shared right now, like our connection to the elements, and explained to me like why we're connected and why we're all the same, and it's not like humans have a higher place within this earth. That really made sense to me, and it's something that I invite everyone to look into. And I have to thank, the leaders like Jaislane Charger from the Standing Rock movement, Tokata Iron Ice. They were just some of the people who spoke to me and gave a wonderful panel on Indigenous women and how they're connected to the climate change fight. And they really inspired me, and that's when I decided to really go deeper into this work. So I'm not sure if I know that's a bit of a larger answer pretty much, but
I absolutely appreciate you sharing that with us, and thank you for that.
Yeah,
That's
of course,
interesting.
it's something that I'm really trying to tackle down. My heritage, it's tricky.
I have a book I'm gonna have to talk with you about after we're done recording.
Oh, of course.
That'll be fun.
I love that.
You've been connecting in with more and more of these amazing and powerful Indigenous activists, and some of them are in the youth movement, right?
Yes.
I was hoping you could share a bit with us about, from your vantage point, what do you see happening? What's going on right now with that?
From like the youth environmental movement, or in general, like
The youth,
with
the youth.
Well, it's a topic that gets me really excited and hopeful for the future because, as you have seen, this past climate strike, which was completely youth-led, was one.
It was amazing.
Yes,
it was amazing.
It was amazing, and it actually broke the world records ever for like a climate strike that has ever happened in history. So worldwide. So I think we're really experiencing a rare moment in history right now. The youth obviously feel compelled to get out of school, right? Because it happened on a Friday. So, and really ask permission from faculty, institutions, their parents, because they care about what their future is going to look like.
Yes.
It's extremely important that the youth takes a step into the climate movement because they are the ones who are going to be suffering from all of the emissions and extractions from the major corporations and the fossil fuel industries. And we're seeing truly, like, I have goosebumps like thinking about it and speaking about it because we're seeing like huge mobilizations and also attention in the media finally about these grassroots movements and the climate justice movement. And we're seeing how Indigenous youth activists are truly present in this fight too, which makes me really happy because usually, you know, they're left behind. There were marvelous Indigenous speakers at the New York March, which gave great speeches and really inspired the crowds. And there has been talk about how privileged like a person who I respect greatly, of course for her work, but like Greta Thunberg, like how privileged she has been more than other indigenous leaders who have been doing this work for years. So already the fact that there is this kind of conversation happening shows that people's people's realities are changing in a way. They're not focused only on what the westernized world is presenting to them, but they're recognizing that there is more to that. And therefore, these other leaders are also getting more attention because there are people who stand with them and they see them and they want to give them a voice. So that's why I was really happy to see people on stages from different communities having a space to talk about these issues.
Absolutely, and it was so powerful to be there and to experience at the march, in particular the speeches that were given at Battery Park. And I got to give a quick shout out to Shie Bastida, who's on the Y on Earth Community's Global Advisory Board, and she comes from a very interesting background, right? She's native, indigenous, Toltec in Central America, as well as indigenous Celtic in Europe.
Yeah.
And just wonderful to see her leadership and hear her clarity of voice. I was at a conference with her a couple months back, our day, in the Rocky Mountains up in Colorado, and we had retired generals, we had presidential candidates, we had some very accomplished and polished speakers addressing the audience there. I'm just glancing over at Joni Klar, who's off camera. She's also one of our Global Advisory Board members. And hi, Joni.
Hi.
So happy to be here.
Yes. Well, Shie, at 17 years old, commanded the room with her genuine oration, her ability to communicate that frankly dwarfed what a lot of these experts, polished leaders were doing. And it's not at all to compare and contrast, but just to highlight and emphasize how strong her voice is, along with so many other indigenous and youth leaders. There seems to be such an awakening, such a convergence, and such an upswell of empowerment and vocalization of what's happening and what needs to be done. And it gives me great hope. I feel so much joy knowing that we are in a critical situation. It is a crisis. We have to act. We have to do everything we can do. And there are more and more of us engaging day by day with incredible knowledge and wisdom like you're sharing with us today, coming through.
Of course. Yes, she's amazing. I've actually seen her as well. She was recently, this past weekend, at the Global Citizen concert which happened in Central Park, where she also had a chance to speak about climate activism and the youth climate movement, along with other climate activists. So I completely agree. She has a very strong voice, and I'm truly happy that we're seeing these young women, indigenous women especially, who have a history of, being truly, undermined and to not use other words, but they're finally reclaiming their power and they're being given the space. And I'm so grateful for that. I think it's the start of a great movement, and it gives me hope as well, for sure.
Absolutely beautiful. Well, another amazing movement that's underway is the B Corp movement, right? And I want to make sure we have a couple minutes to talk about that, because it really is among the core and the key calls to action for our audience.
Yeah.
Tell us what's going on with B corporations, and what can we do in regular day-to-day life about that?
Of course. So yes, the B corporations are actually a group of private sector, so companies that truly care about following certain sustainable practices. So everything that comes from their supply chains, how they source their material, how they manufacture their material, everything is done by really making sure that the environment is not disrupted, that the people who work are paid, are taken care of, and they're not used. And so the audience can actually go to the link that you provided, and which will also be in the notes of the episode, because on this website there is a list of all of the corporations which are actually embracing these principles. And I'm happy to say that more and more are joining, like, each year, and this is a movement worldwide that is happening. And the importance of the private sector within the climate movement and the reduction of fossil fuels, and also all of these other issues, human issues that we've spoken about, really has a great root in what the private sector decides to embrace, right? We also have a power as consumers, of course, to drive what the private sector decides to embrace as principles. So the more that we will request like transparency from what we eat, or for example, what we buy, this will drive corporations to, because obviously if they're losing money, they're going to be driven to create like better sustainable practices and products. There are huge issues with the food industry, the clothing industry, which uses tons and tons of water just to produce, a new fashion line every 2 months, which is also called fast fashion. And also the cosmetic industry, which truly is filled for the majority with harmful chemicals, such as petroleum as well. And these are things that are not really like spoken about, but grassroots organizations alongside private sector companies are informing each other by actually studying what is happening on a small scale in communities. For example, there is a nonprofit called We Act in Harlem, which is organizing a study on the community, because women up in Harlem have been experiencing skin rashes and like health problems, especially those who work in nail salons and hair salons, because the products that are cheaper to use especially, and obviously are cheaper to buy, are the ones who are most filled with these chemicals. So I truly invite people to like look into like the products that they're using, and to perhaps use second-handed like clothing, and things of this sort can truly help the climate crisis. As we said, it's all connected.
Absolutely. It's so beautiful. I love the way you're weaving all of this together. And by the way, in our soil stewardship webinar, we have a few vignettes, one of which is going to a secondhand clothing store. And it was so fun. We had so much fun recording it. We also, in that same webinar, visited a Patagonia store in Colorado. And of course, Patagonia is a B Corporation, one of the leaders, approaching $1 billion a year in sales. They are having real impact, positive impact on regenerative agriculture, on social justice, and sustainable economic development in the interest of communities all over. Of course, now at their launch of their food line, it's amazing. I love it.
Yes.
And the fact that we did not talk about this ahead of time, folks. I'm serious here. We have a special announcement, and the fact that Ludovica naturally started talking about cosmetics is amazing to me, because we are announcing a partnership with Beauty Counter, and Beauty Counter is also a B Corp, and they are partnered in a deep way with the Environmental Working Group, EWG, a toxicity lab doing all kinds of studies on all kinds of ingredients on cosmetics, health and beauty products for men and women. and their lines are very clean. They're in the process of switching all their packaging from plastic to glass.
Wow.
And because of our partnership, everyone, you can link on the beauty counter links you'll see on the podcast page, as well as on the sponsorship page in the community section of the website. And by going to Beauty Counter through the Y on Earth link, a portion of the proceeds will actually come back to support the work of the Y on Earth community. So that's just an amazing synergy. It's serendipitous.
Amazing.
I'm blown away, but not surprised. And the thing, it is so critical. It's affecting water. It's affecting our own health and well-being. You know, every day when we get in the shower, when we're getting ready for the day, doing whatever we do to get ready, we have a very basic choice. We're either basically putting carcinogens all over our body. Our skin is our largest organ, highly porous, absorbs everything. Or not everything, that's not literal, that was an exaggeration, absorbs a lot. Or we can use these very clean and plant-based products that are not carcinogenic, not harmful, and perhaps are even adding to our health and well-being through the phytonutrients and all of the other properties of the plant kingdom. So just a tremendous example of, in all these different sectors, food, beverage, clothing, cosmetics, health and beauty, all cleaning products, right?
Oh yes, that's a big one too.
The choices are in a way stark. I mean, it's kind of like the why, the one way, the other way. But the good news is there are so many amazing companies making really, really beautiful products available now.
Yes, absolutely, and most of them, really support the work of people in developing countries, small
Mhm.
family businesses, and most of them, in contrast to what most people think, are not more expensive than the products that are filled with chemicals actually.
Yes,
So encourage people to look at their options.
absolutely.
For sure.
And when it comes to food, we start making a connection to the agriculture and agroforestry opportunities, right? And I wanted to make sure we took some time to speak about that, because I know you've been doing a lot of research in that arena as well.
Yes, sure. Do you want me to speak about something in particular in that sense?
Well, sure. Maybe you could tell us what is agroforestry? How does that look and work? And yeah, what's a great example perhaps of how you're seeing that deployed and activated?
Well, something that is actually, relevant to what is happening right now in the Amazon. There are indigenous communities in the Amazon, which are applying agroforestry, which, to put it into simple words, is essentially a system of agriculture where there is absolutely no eradication of like the soil or the water, but everything is really like left to sustain itself. So it really embraces the idea of like the cycle of life, and how actually both like animals and plants can cooperate together without using the monoculture of planting, which means like just planting one type of product on the soil repeatedly until it's exhausted.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the agroforestry industry is not as large as it should be. It was in the past. But now with the crisis that is happening in the Amazon, at least these Amazonian communities which are applying agroforestry are being, are getting more attention because they're claiming for justice and showing how there is an alternative to like the Western ways of like practicing agriculture, pretty much. And there are some interesting short videos, documentaries on this, which we perhaps like link as well, which show some examples in practice, because people need to see this. It's beautiful. Like how it just looks like a forest, right?
Yes.
But it actually maintains itself and it produces food and nutrients and everything you need without
Yes.
disrupting the environment.
Absolutely beautiful. And so those resources are through the FAO.org site, is that right?
Yes, that's a more like I would say like literate piece, so it doesn't include like videos, but I can share more like actual videos.
Yeah, we'll add in
on
a link for that. That'd be great. And then back to the responsible fashion, we also have a link here, goodonyou.eco, right?
Yes.
Cool.
So Good On You is an app that was actually recommended through a friend who works for sustainable fashion, advocating for sustainable fashion, and it's an app that essentially tells you what are the companies that are sustainable. So like what products they use, the condition of their workers. Obviously, they they use materials such as hemp, for example, and most importantly, they really tackle their usage of water as being like the minimum as possible, and recycled materials, etc. And you have to see these brands and their products. It looks like just like regular clothes,
Great.
right? Like high-end clothing.
Wonderful. So that's good on you. I'm just thrilled that we've had the opportunity to visit with you today, Ludovica, and I know that we'll be staying in touch and collaborating and perhaps doing some events together in the coming weeks and months. And before we sign off, I want to give you an opportunity, if you have any final comments, thoughts, or calls to action to share with our audience, that would be wonderful.
Yes, for sure. Well, we definitely have touched upon some of the points. I feel like I've made some call for action throughout this episode already, but just to really like conclude this conversation, I would like everyone to first of all go vote, which is extremely important for these issues to be tackled. We must recognize our privilege of being able to vote and our freedom to voice our opinion. That is extremely important. So no excuses, just go vote. Another important thing that can truly make a difference is to keep on having conversations like this and trying to open our minds to what hasn't really been taught within like our upbringing, whatever issue it is, like gender issues, climate issue, identity issues. It's important to keep on having conversations and to really join forces one with the other, because we're not alone in this society which wants us to feel alone so that we can consume more products and more resources, but we're actually all connected one to the other. And go down in the street and protest if you can as well, because we have the freedom to do that, and therefore we should support the youth especially that is doing this tremendous work, and we need help from all sorts of like generations and sectors in order to really achieve climate justice.
Absolutely beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Ludovica. It's
Thank
wonderful
you for
talking
having
with you.
me. Thank you for having me. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Beautiful.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
The Y on Earth Community Stewardship and Sustainability podcast series is hosted by Aaron William Perry, author, thought leader, and executive consultant. The podcast and video recordings are made possible by the generous support of people like you. To sign up as a daily, weekly, or monthly supporter, please visit yonearth.org/support. Support packages start at just $1 per month. The podcast series is also sponsored by several corporate and organization sponsors. You can get discounts on their products and services using the code YONEARTH, all one word with a Y. These sponsors are listed on the yonearth.org/support page. If you found this particular podcast episode especially insightful, informative, or inspiring, Please pass it on and share it with a friend whom you think will also enjoy it. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. And thank you for being a part of the Y on Earth community.